doing something really great for yourself and your fellow Kiwis. And it's an intangible. I don't know why it felt so good, but, hundreds of thousands of people agreed that it did. The vibe was terrific and it worked.
Stephen,
probably.
Yeah, let's get a response from Stephen. Did you buy into the Vaxathon, Stephen? Super Saturday?
Well, we certainly watched it on TV. We were already double vaxxed, but and was really thrilled. Was really thrilled by the result. But I think Wallace and Ali, it took me back to a different time. When New Zealand was a team of 3 million, and we all did microwave classes and could sing the telethon song, and the colour TV was just coming in. This is becoming a very nostalgic program, Wallace. But beyond that, it was fantastic. I think it got the vibe. Let's hope it continues because we've all got to get vaccinated.
Briefly, and on that, either of you know people who are still not vaxxed, Ellie?
Not personally here in New Zealand. I do have some people that are reasonably close to me in Australia who are a bit hesitant. Not my immediately family. Both my children are double vaxxed. They live in Australia. But no, not here in New Zealand. Most people I talk to are fully on board. I
don't know anyone myself. I know of people, mind you.
Thank you for that, Ali Moore. Stephen Jacoby, I've been thinking.
Yeah, well, Wallace, this is now a prime time spot because we're 3 minutes away from the Prime Minister. So I've really got to sort of pass a big message like get vaccinated or reduce your carbon emissions or embrace free trade or something like that. But actually, I've been thinking about the pleasure you can get from your pet. Now, I am not actually an animal person, but just recently our bubble has adopted a rescue puppy called Fuji, a black-mouthed cur staffy cross. And Fuji is giving us lots of fun during this really dreary lockdown when everything is so negative. So I'd just like to, in the few minutes before the Prime Minister joins us, give a shout-out to Animal Rescue Action Network, our run, Louise Barry and her team. They do a great job. Check them out on Facebook. And I'm really interested to know whether there are any listeners who've had their hearts turned like mine by a little dog who was rescued from the streets.
Let's do a nationwide shout out to and a homage to your lockdown pet and why it is taking you through these tough times. Text us 2101. What's your pet's name? Why do you love it so much? I know that, Ellie, you've got a pet too, don't you?
I do. I moved out to the country right before lockdown, and so my little Ponsonby dog has had to become a rural dog, farm dog. I can actually faintly hear her up at the stockyards right now. She's barking and has, I think she's got a rat up.
Yes, I can hear. Hey, Ali, on that note, we've got to go. Ali Moore, Stephen Jacoby, stay with us 4 to 5 on the panel right here.
RNZ News at 4 o'clock. Kia ora, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Bradley. A government update on COVID-19 is about to begin at the Beehive and will cross to that live as soon as it does. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is about to announce Cabinet's decision on any changes in COVID alert levels or restrictions. The COVID-19 Response Minister and the Director General of Health will also be part of the live-streamed briefing. Ministers have been deciding whether parts of Waikato and Northland are safe to move out of level 3 or at least have some restrictions loosened. They have also been considering a new traffic light-like system for the future management of COVID-19. Nationals leader Judith Collins is calling for the Prime Minister to clearly lay out the conditions and time frame for Auckland coming out of its current level 3 step 1. People in Auckland who are moving around the city in Alert Level 3 are being urged to get a COVID-19 test if they have any symptoms. There are 57 new cases in Auckland today and 3 in Waikato. 19 community testing centres are open across Auckland City. Mobile surveillance testing of residential facilities is continuing, including at emergency housing, board houses, motels and community housing providers. Public health authorities say so far testing has been completed at about 50 sites. Nearly 4 million tests in total have been done in Auckland, with nearly 21,000 in the past 24 hours. Vaccination rates for Taranaki Māori continue to pale in comparison to the general population in the region, with 62% having received the first dose and only 38% being fully inoculated. By comparison, 80% of people in Taranaki have now had a first dose and 57% are fully vaccinated. The national rate for first doses is 85% and 65% of people are now fully vaccinated across the country. The Taranaki District Health Board says working with Māori health providers will be a key to reaching the 90% vaccinated mark by the end of the year. There are plans to hold a farm gate tour of Southland to boost vaccination rates in rural areas of the region. While 86% of Otago and Southland have now had at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, those numbers were significantly lower in the rural Southland and Gore districts. Southern Vaccination Program lead Hamish Brown says the Southern DHB has already started planning with the mayors of those areas to visit 20 to 25 small communities to boost vaccination. A 31-year-old man has been charged with murder following the death of a teenager in Middlemore Hospital after a shooting in Mangere over the weekend. The police say the man handed himself in this morning and he is due to appear in the Manukau District Court tomorrow. 19-year-old Misiona Talafu Petelo died in hospital after arriving with critical injuries. Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Tiernan says the police are providing support to Mr Petelo's whānau and continuing to investigate. The Chiefs and Māori All Blacks player Sean Wainui is being mourned as a talented player who held immense mana among his teammates and the wider rugby community. Wainui has died in a car crash at McLaren Falls Park near Tauranga.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Today I'll set out Cabinet's decisions on alert levels in Auckland, Northland and the Waikato, as well as signal announcements for the rest of the week. Firstly, though, I want to say something briefly about Super Saturday. We all know what it meant for vaccine numbers. 130,000 people vaccinated in one day is enormous. It was a tribute to the health staff, to the people who have been working tirelessly alongside them for months, community organisations who work so hard to support people to be there, the business community who promoted the day and provided every reason and incentive possible to be vaccinated. The biggest success of Super Saturday, alongside the lives saved, is that it reminded us all we are still a team. That through this really hard few months, if we have a job to do, we will rally to do it. Today we are making decisions that are based on the here and now, alert level decisions that are based on case numbers and what we can do safely. And this has been primarily affecting Auckland, but also now the Waikato and Northland. We know that in the future, we cannot ask people to live week by week, not knowing when things will change or how to help things speed up. We know that needs to change, and we have a plan on how. While the announcements today will be about the next few weeks, on Friday, we'll provide the detail around the system we will use to protect ourselves in a highly vaccinated environment. We'll give details on how we'll move into that new system and what will help us get there. On Tuesday, I'll be joined by Minister Henare to talk about the work we're doing to lift vaccination rates in our Māori communities. This work is absolutely critical. On Wednesday, Minister Hipkins will present the up-to-date advice on schools reopening. And on Friday, as I said, will release the details of the new COVID protection framework and how we'll get there. But for now, let's come to the alert level decisions. Today, Cabinet has confirmed that New Zealand, outside of those areas with level 3 restrictions, will remain at alert level 2. I'll come then to the decisions for Northland, the Waikato, and then Auckland. Let's start with Northland. With more than 16,000 tests undertaken since the first positive case, and testing across 19 wastewater sites, all returning negative results, all the evidence to date suggests the individuals who tested positive in Northland have not spread it further. I would, however, always ask anyone with symptoms to get a test and anyone still waiting to get a vaccination. On this basis, and on the advice of the Director General of Health, Northland will move to alert level 2 at 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, the 19th of October. For the Waikato, the situation is different. While the cases remain broadly linked, this linking is often occurring after the positive results are being returned. I acknowledge the testing, more than 45,000, and vaccination efforts of those in the region beyond this, during this period. But as you will have seen, there have been further cases and some positive wastewater testing in the greater area, and so we need to act with caution at the moment. That is why Cabinet has decided to hold the Waikato at level 3. We will review these settings and update any change in position on Friday. And now to Auckland. Today is day 62 of alert level 4 or 3 in Tamaki Makaurau. That is a long time to have been living with restrictions. But those restrictions have made a huge difference. They've helped us to keep case numbers as low as possible while we continue to vaccinate people. And vaccinations continue to be so important, not just in the future, but right now. Only 4% of cases in this outbreak were people who were fully vaccinated. And of the 158 who needed hospital care, only 3 were fully vaccinated. But we need to keep going with both tools, our restrictions and vaccinations, because with Delta, we cannot rely on just one. If we get this right, if we keep case numbers low while we vaccinate people, then it makes it easier for us to keep control of COVID while we ease restrictions in the future. And that is everyone's goal. So the question for Cabinet today has been, how do we avoid a spike in case numbers and hospitalisations and protect vulnerable communities as much as possible in the coming weeks while we keep lifting vaccination numbers? First, it is important to remember that the alert level 3 rules in Auckland are currently the toughest restrictions in place anywhere in the OECD at the moment, according to the Oxford Stringency Index. These are not soft rules. Despite that, a number of respected scientists and epidemiologists have suggested a return to level 4 for a defined 2-week lockdown to act as a circuit breaker and limit the number of cases while our vaccinations take hold and strengthen our immunity. However, the public health advice, including from teams on the ground and from Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, is that 2 more weeks at level 4 is unlikely at this stage to reduce the number of cases significantly because of the nature of the outbreak and the fact that compliance has been an issue. We considered both sets of advice carefully. Cabinet has to take into account a range of factors, including the overall well-being of Aucklanders and how hard this period has been. But the consideration that stood out for us the most was the view amongst those closest to the outbreak that this increase in restrictions would not necessarily reduce cases significantly more than the level 3 restrictions we already have. So the next question is, what can we do? Has decided is that Auckland will remain at alert level 3, and with the current gatherings, parties, social catch-ups, they're not part of level 3. And it's one of the things we cannot afford to let slip. I know this is hard, and I want to acknowledge the ongoing impact, in particular on Auckland business, of staying at level 3. We've heard the call from the Auckland business community for additional support given the extended period of restrictions. Minister Robertson is currently wishing to share more of the details of this on Friday. And finally, a quick preview to the announcement that will work, and so that is why we'll be releasing that on Friday.
What you know of the vaccine numbers now and how they're likely to roll out over the coming couple of weeks, do you expect that Auckland will move down to level 2 or a loosening of restrictions in 2 weeks' time?
So our view was to set out as much as we could the path for the next few weeks, and based on what we've seen now and our ongoing job to continue to just keep this outbreak in check while we continue to vaccinate, the advice was to hold where we are. But we have always listened to all of the advice that's been available to us, both from our scientific community, epidemiologists, and our public health experts. And the strong advice that came through to us from public health on the ground was that, knowing what they know about the outbreak as it stands, their view was that level 4 would not necessarily make a significant difference to the cases that we have in this current outbreak. And that's because of what they know in a detailed way about where the outbreak has occurred and whether or not an increase on restrictions would necessarily stop the kind of activity that has led to a flow-on of cases. However, level 3, if followed, actually would make a difference. Amazing job. I know it's been hard, but please stick with it while we vaccinate. We need ongoing.
Bit of a rich port of, has that become a bit of a feature of it, or is that just
that? And that would be wrong. So that's why I found it necessary just to highlight that is not correct. It's an assumption that is absolutely wrong.
Come in
on that. I'm sorry, then I did say that I was going to come over to Jason.
In that vein, have you seen the footage of the party that happened on the North Shore over the weekend?
I have not seen the footage. I have had it described to me. The description was enough. Last week, looking at Australia, who had the same restrictions for a very long period, and then you just see it a tipping point after a period of time where cases just balloon. And one of the things that we thought a lot about before making the decision around people being able to meet outside was, if you are going to break the rules, you're probably by and large going to try and do that in a hidden way so as not to draw attention to yourself. And that is likely to be inside, which is the most dangerous place for people to break rules. So that's why we were very deliberate in saying, here is a safe way that you can have social contact to help you continue with what are pretty tough restrictions. But that means we're asking you, do not congregate inside with others. That is, we've given you a safe way where you can be seen to be complying and where people can see that you're just doing the right thing outside. Please don't go inside and continue that kind of congregation. That is the risk, and we've seen it in this outbreak.
Prime Minister, just on the back to the traffic light system. So sooner or later this week, we're hoping sooner, Auckland will hit that 90% milestone for first vaccinations, and then you would imagine between 3 and 4 weeks after that, overall 40%. That's for the whole Auckland metro region.
You have a prediction for what the double dose
will be in 2 weeks' time? No, but we could have a look at that. I think at the moment they're over 70%, so I'd imagine it'd be well in excess of 80%.
Double dose at the moment, 71. Do you want it on just bookings or projections?
On projection, and also obviously some people are walking in.
Yeah, because bookings aren't a great forecasting mechanism for us anymore.
Yeah, a lot of over the last few weeks, most of the vaccinations have been each day in Auckland and elsewhere have been walk-ins. There's a lot of capacity there in the system, but ministers were a part of those calls, and so was I. As a consequence of that, we made some commitments to try and change the way we were working on some elements of funding, data sharing, a range of things that we thought would help support vaccination rollout. Subsequent to that, we've had Minister Henare out on the road, and that's one of the reasons I'd like to bring him here tomorrow, is to talk about some of what he's hearing and what work we're doing to overcome that. We need to remove any barrier that might exist to enable our providers, whether or not they're health providers or whether they can help us drive demand, so that we can drive up vaccination rates for our Māori communities. And everyone's committed to that. It's all just about how we get there. On Tairāwhiti, I saw the report. Someone sent me the Give a Little page. And that is, not one region in this country should have to rely on a fundraising campaign to set up something that we are directly working hard to fund and support. We put additional money in to support Māori vaccination rates. I know in Tairāwhiti they have mobile facilities because I've been on them. They have a bus in Tairāwhiti and Gisborne. They have a mobile vaccination clinic that they were using in Ruatoria when I was there. for me, this just is a question of getting the resource in the right place. So we've got ministers working on that as we speak, because there is no need to fundraise to get this vaccination campaign going. We just need to make sure that the resource is in the right place.
But when you look at how much, because I think it's about 80 million now, isn't it, across the 2 tranches that has been set aside.
87?
Do you know roughly how much of that has been, like, what availability is there still?
I'll get Minister Henare perhaps to speak to some of that tomorrow, if I may, because my intent there was to get him to talk in a little more detail about what he's observing and what more we can do.
There's not the money there, it's just a communication.
In some areas, the relationship with the DHBs and the movement of that funding between DHBs and providers is great. In other areas, it has been a little more difficult. And so I suspect
When you look at that map
I'm just going to turn this around a little bit. Is this specifically on that question?
when you look at that map around Tairāwhiti, it's very clear that there's gaps there where there aren't across the rest of the country. Why is the ministry not coordinating better? If you can't rely on the DHBs to get it done, why is the government and the ministry not coordinating better so that people don't have to go out and go to Capital?
Yeah, well, our absolute commitment is that where there are gaps or people have difficulty accessing, that needs to change. And as I say, I've been in regions where they have had mobile vaccination clinics up and down the country. It so happens that on that particular day, they weren't. I would have expected that they would be. So obviously there is work there to do.
On Māori engagement, the traffic light system, a large number of Māori groups consulted on that over Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and they've released a statement saying they strongly reject the traffic light framework. So how much is that going to play into what's announced on Friday?
So I guess I'd say 2 things. Firstly, yes, we are absolutely out there consulting, talking to various different groups, leadership in Māori, Pacific communities, church communities, the business sector. And what I'd say is that whilst, of course, we're sharing that framework, we're not always at a point where we've concluded the way it will be implemented and how we will do it safely. So my view is that once we talk more about some of that, that may satisfy some of the concerns that exist. There may potentially be a view out there that we are fundamentally going to change our approach, which is to work very hard to keep people safe from COVID. We are not. All of this, though, is about saying we said when we had a highly vaccinated population we would do things differently, but safely, and we will.
How different is the version that the Māori groups and the independent experts who reviewed it last Thursday going to be from what's announced?
So, of course, we'll leave that to the date that it's released. But I think one of the things that people are looking for is when will we start using it? And my message is when we have a highly vaccinated population. And I think that will make a big difference for people to hear that.
Can you go into whether there's going to be differences in access for vaccinated versus unvaccinated people?
Of course, we'll wait until we release some of that framework. But you've already heard us say we will use vaccine certificates.
Just on those meetings?
And then I'll come to you, Ben.
Actually, Dr. Bloomfield, just to follow up on Derek's question, have you got any modelling on when Auckland will hit 90% double dosed, if it will?
Yes. It will be when 90% of people have had their second dose, but
forecasting for about when that might be?
Well, we would imagine it will be between 3 and 4 weeks after. At the moment, our average interval between first and second dose is about 28 days, so right on 4 weeks. It's probably coming down since we told people any time after 3 weeks, and we're expecting that first dose to reach that 90% milestone. I would say that is right across all of Auckland, and if we do look by district health board as well, and there are differences between the district health boards. Auckland is ahead of Waitemata, which is ahead of Counties Manukau, so it will vary a little bit by DHB.
Okay, Ben.
Okay, thank you. Could you please describe, the Prime Minister said before that the advice you gave today was that level 4 lockdown probably wouldn't achieve what some of the kind of components of it say it will on the box. Can you just describe to us what the tenor of your advice was around that?
Well, the first point I would make is that every time we do a public health risk assessment for any alert level, we go in with an open mind. And certainly with regards to Auckland's situation, we went in considering what the full range of options that could be employed. And secondly, we looked then at a whole range of factors, and I would say that our colleagues who are on the ground doing the public health response in Auckland and likewise for both Northland and Waikato are involved in those public health risk assessments. So we absolutely canvass their view about what they are seeing and whether or not they think the current restrictions or tightening or loosening those restrictions will support what they are trying to do. And in this case, we very clearly converged on maintaining the current level of restrictions and really emphasising two things. First of all, people complying and continuing, as most Aucklanders are, to abide by those alert level 3 restrictions, and secondly, really continuing the vaccination program apace with a big focus on Māori and Pacifica. That was their focus. Yeah.
You both talked about the non-compliance and that there's evidence of non-compliance within homes, people going to each other's places. In what form? How has that information been coming to you? Has that been through the public health teams at the front?
Yeah. Public health team.
What is it?
Yeah, the public health team. So when they analyse exposure events. And look through at, and as they're contact tracing, they're getting exposure events and locations of interest and possible contacts, and are identifying that there are households getting together indoor, so outside of the restrictions, which are contributing. And so when they did a breakdown of the biggest contributing factor to new cases, that was amongst the most significant. And work sites was actually further down. Yeah. Again, I would reinforce though that this is not everyone. And a large portion of Aucklanders have consistently been doing the right thing. We're just asking that people stick with it, because we are reaching a point where it just gets harder because it's so long. Yeah. I did say Ben.
Just back on the Māori consultations, did you acknowledge that there was a groundswell of support, at least a large amount of support for a return to level 4? And in that, a growing sort of disconnection between what the government is doing, what many Māori want?
Well, actually, I've had a direct readout from that meeting because, of course, we had Māori ministers present there. And the feedback that I've received is, yes, there were some who were of the view that a move to level 4 was necessary, but there were some who, speaking from within Tamaki Makaurau, had a different view. So I think it's fair to say that there were a range of views in some of the dialogue that's been going on. Well, and you can see we've tried to take all of it into account, all of those competing different views.
If I just switch topics
Go ahead.
And acknowledge the climate aid announcement this morning.
Yes.
I just thought I'd ask when you will decide and announce the national determined contribution ahead of COP26, and can I invite you to preempt what that might be?
We will make that decision in the lead up to COP26.
So
I'm not in a position to give you a date at this stage.
Expect New Zealand to up its targets, up its ambitions.
We've already said, and you will have seen from the Climate Commission, our view was that we needed to ensure that our nationally determined contribution was in keeping with a 1.5 degree target, because that's what we've got embedded in our Zero Carbon Act. So we asked the Climate Commission to give us advice. They gave us a steer that it needed to increase, and now we're doing the work to see what that looks like.
That should be imminently, right? That announcement should
it's not too far away.
So does that come to my colleague quickly, please? Does the government
I'll come to you, and then I'm going to come to... I'll let you get those out of the way, and then I'm going to come to Bernard, and then we're going to come to you in the front.
Does the government intend to introduce another vaccine as well as Pfizer to help boost the country's vaccination rates, given there are a portion who don't want Pfizer? And do you at least plan to recognise Kiwis as vaccinated who have had other vaccines like Janssen or Astra?
Yes. So to answer that second question, yes, we will have New Zealanders who will have been abroad, who will have been vaccinated by vaccines that we ourselves at some point have either been involved in purchasing or have considered purchasing. And so we are working to ensure that we can recognise those Kiwis' vaccination status in New Zealand. On the issue of other vaccines, I might get Dr. Bloomfield to speak to that.
Yes, so we're still actively working up advice on an alternative for people who may be willing to be vaccinated but have a particular concern about the mRNA vaccines. And we've nearly finalised that advice, and once it's gone to the Minister and decisions have been made, then I'm sure there will be an announcement about that.
Yeah.
Prime Minister, will the vaccination threshold or milestone you talk about on Friday, will it ensure that we wait for Māori, young Māori vaccination rates to get up to the safe level of 90% plus?
I've indicated that we'll have a milestone, as it were, an entry point, but I'm not going to speak any further to that until all of those details are finalised and presented on Friday.
Not even to say it's an overall average or by...
Because, of course, you will understand that we'll want to make announcements on that at one time on Friday. I thought it was only fair, though, that we acknowledge, given issues that are being raised by some of the experts that we're consulting with, that we have, and we have been talking about these issues with different groups. I only thought it right to indicate that that was part of our decision making and planning, but we'll be releasing details on Friday.
Just on the advice that you got from the group of epidemiologists versus the Ministry of Health, what was the modelling from each group on how many extra cases would come at level 4 versus level 3?
So it's very hard to model compliance, is what I've been told. What we have instead been looking at is what the R value, the reproductive value, is looking like currently. Of course, what we've said, and I said this last week, an R value that is closer to 1 means it's more likely that we'll have a lower number of cases even in the future when we're more highly vaccinated and are looking to ease restrictions. It will make it easier for us to maintain low levels of cases. So that's the goal. The R value has trended, I think previously we were looking between 1.3 and 1.4. It's looking like it's come down a bit more recently. I'll let Dr. Bloomfield speak to that because I received modelling that has 2 different R values at the moment, so it can be a little difficult to find the pathway through. They're tending between 1.2 and 1.3 at the moment, but some R values are a little lower than that at the moment.
So which R value for which level?
For which R value? As I've said, the modelling, compliance, and then the likely R value out of 4 versus 3 is quite difficult.
So you don't have advice on whether level 4 would have lowered that R value?
Dr. Bloomfield, do you want to speak to
correct,
that?
and when we talk about getting advice from epidemiologists and the experts, most of that advice comes through the media. So the views are well known. The modelling can model what the trajectory might be with the current number of cases and depending on different R values. But what the modelling can't show is what the impact of the current settings or alert level 4 might be on that R value. And so that's much more a judgment, and that's where, again, indeed, we canvass the views of a range of people, including our colleagues on the ground.
Just to add to what Dr. Bloomfield has said, though, we did have a session where we've canvassed some of the future framework with public health experts and epidemiologists as part of that. We did talk about the current outbreak in Auckland, and they did offer up views as part of that as well. So that was last week.
Surely not having 280,000 people go to work, which is the difference between level 3 and level 4, is going to reduce.
However, keeping in mind, as I've just said, some of the work that has come out of the team on the ground in Auckland has suggested that work sites have not been one of the bigger contributing factors to cases that we've seen in recent days. In fact, as I've said, one of the bigger contributors continues to be households. That's not to say we haven't seen cases in workplaces, we have, but it hasn't been one of the bigger contributing factors.
On the weekend.
Okay, I am going to, as I said I would, I will come to Derek in the front.
I had a stuff on that from Bernard and Dr. Bloomfield. Can you tell us what the current VAX 1-2 dose rates are for young Māori and young Pacifica 12 to 14 in Southern Waikato?
You want the overall region?
12 to 14.
I don't have a specific.
12 to 14.
Which age range would you like?
12 to 39.
Okay, so for 12 to 19, dose 1 in the Auckland region is 60%, 20 to 34, 58, 35 to 49, 70, 50 to 64, 86, and 65 and over is 94. It's all available publicly.
The last update is from Wednesday for that.
Yep.
Much data. So if you have the young age group for Māori and Pacific.
And I will say that is from Thursday, the 14th of October.
They'll be updating it today with all the data, taking into all the data from the weekend as well.
Yeah.
On what that rate needs to be for the young Māori Pacific age group for restrictions, before restrictions can be safely eased in Auckland?
As we've said, we are going to speak in more detail on some of these issues on Friday.
Will there be a Māori specific?
5% gap between first doses and second doses. Some of these people who get a first dose and then don't come back for a second one. Do you expect that to narrow, and are there efforts to reach out to those people? Because it would seem to be, if you did set a target of 95%, then you need to get 100% first dose.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. If you wanted to hit 95, you would presumably need 100% on first dose.
Yeah. So currently,
no, I was answering the question around if you were seeking 95%, which is being recommended by some advocates, that you would need to have 100% first dose in order to reach 95% second dose.
Relating that you might be going then for...
You are absolutely incorrect to do so. That was merely an answer to a question, Dr. Bloomfield.
Yes, so to date, it's been about a 96% sort of follow through on that second dose, but that's using a specific cut-off point, and so it may be just some people have delayed that second dose beyond the cut-off that is used, but there is an active program which Whakarangaro Healthline is supporting in making phone calls out to those people whose second dose is overdue, as it were, to boost that second dose uptake.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I'll let you go, Mark.
On the level 4 issue, the expectation is that a level 4 lockdown might not make such a big difference because the people who aren't following the rules at level 3 won't do it at level 4 either. As the outbreak continues
you perhaps
to grow,
said that a little more directly than I did, but yes.
As the outbreak continues to grow elsewhere in Auckland and reaches out to the wider city, is there a chance that arithmetic changes a little bit and actually a level 4 lockdown?
Yeah, so look, I think what it's fair to say is that we will always keep under review our settings, and whilst that's been the decision today, we are going to do what we've always done and constantly look at what's occurring, what the outbreak is telling us, what we can learn from the nature of the outbreak, and if all of that data changes, then the advice may well change. But this is the advice we have for now.
And Prime Minister, what I would say is, talking to my counterpart, Dr. Brendan Murphy in Australia last week, he said it was really clear what the impact was of high vaccination levels in Sydney. And the levels they've got there are just slightly ahead of what we've got in Tamaki Makaurau. But he said it's very obvious the impact, and you can see their case numbers are really dropping there.
Just a couple of questions. Have really any COVID cases that have been announced today or yesterday that had attended the protest on Saturday? And also, is there any update on the 5 to 11-year-old age group vaccination eligibility?
Yeah. So what we tend to do in our case reports is we will have proactive reporting from our team on the ground as to whether or not there's anything that's considered particularly high risk or of note. I haven't had it reported to me that there's been a case amongst protesters.
No, not as yet, and our great hope is that there aren't. But I would ask all those people who were at those events, or indeed any other social events over the weekend, if they have symptoms, please get a test straight away. On the 5 to 11s, look, there's no real change in that. The only country that has had an application, as I understand it, so far, is the USA, and we are expecting the data to be provided to MedSafe soon for an application to get approval for the vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds, and we will let you know as soon as that is received.
So yeah, that's a really important point to note, that actually we can't actively move on the issue until Pfizer submits data to us for consideration, and they have not yet done that, but as soon as they have, we'll let you know.
So just on inflation today, were you concerned by that level?
Look, it is not out of step with what we are seeing internationally. And I was just looking at the reports. Of course, the US is at 5.4%, Canada at 4.1%. So you can see that the impacts of COVID, particularly in New Zealand, the impact on supply chain, you see coming through in the increase that we've seen today.
Prime Minister, in terms of support for businesses, will that be targeted to industries, or will that support depend on falls in revenue similar to the wage subsidy?
If you don't mind, I am going to let Minister Robertson just stick with sharing more information on Friday.
Okay, and in terms of households, you've previously indicated that low-income households might receive some more financial support.
Yes.
I might do is see whether or not we can actually put a date on when we're likely to announce those, because I am aware that we have signalled to you that that's coming. Decisions have been made, so I'll make sure that we set some dates and communicate them to you.
We assume that will be a fairly limited amount of financial support?
You can assume that we continue to be quite targeted and trying to reach those households who need it the most.
Hipkins said over the weekend that Cabinet was going
I'm going
to
to come down to pick you and I'll come over to you.
Change the subject. What's the current state of play in terms of decision making on the Three Waters issues?
I'll let Minister Mahuta make announcements on that in due course as well. So nothing further to update you on at this point. Yeah.
So Hipkins mentioned on the weekend that Cabinet was considering today MIQ alternatives. How quickly could Kiwis overseas be steering down shorter stays in MIQ or home isolation?
Yeah, so we've always said as part of our Reconnecting New Zealand work that shortened stays and home isolation were and are part of our future plan for reconnecting New Zealand to the world. And of course, though, the calculation for us is to continue with whatever changes we make, to do that safely and in a considered way. When we've got further announcements to make there, we will.
That everything's kind of being brought forward. Cases are isolating in the community, that discrepancy is growing. So when can Kiwis start coming home?
It is fair to say that, of course, this outbreak has caused us to bring forward some of the plans that we may have already had. That's not to say that we won't still continue to be really considered in the decisions we make sure that they make sense in the environment we're operating in, but that also we're operating safely. We don't want to unnecessarily seed potential cases in the community when we are still continuing to control and manage and reduce cases as much as we can, particularly in Tamaki Makaurau.
There are so few cases at the border. There are vastly more cases within the community. Kiwis overseas.
5 today? 5 today, yeah.
Was it 60 in the community? So you see there's that discrepancy, and Kiwis overseas are really stressed. Yeah. If you had shorter stays in ISO or home isolation.
I'm probably just going to repeat the same answer I just gave.
Bring it forward this year. Kiwis can come home by Christmas, be reunited
I'll
with their
just
families.
repeat the same answer I've given. Perhaps I can do it in a shorter soundbite for you. As part of our Reconnecting New Zealand work, we are looking to shorten MIQ stays, and we have been looking at self-isolation. The outbreak in Auckland has brought forward a number of our other plans. This is an area where we are actively considering as we speak, but top of mind for us when we do make changes will be safety, and we will be very considered. I don't have announcements for you today, but it's something we're working on right now.
Prime Minister, just on Te Motu.
Yes, Joe.
As you continue with vaccination, you're going to have to get more targeted about it as you get into a group who are not particularly keen. We know that Māori are low, we know that to a lesser extent Pacifica are low as well. What information do you have around what that other group is? I know you have been into the regions in the last couple of weeks, you were in Taranaki at the end of last week. Were you speaking to people there who are vaccine hesitant? Yes. What are their reasons? What sort of demographic are they? How do you get to that other group of people that aren't the obvious?
That's a good question. The one thing I would say is that we do tend to speak, and there tends to be a generalisation about Māori vaccination rates that don't take into account how high the vaccination rates are for our older Māori, and I think it's really important to keep acknowledging that because in Auckland alone, it's 94% for first dose for our over 65s. Yeah. But what am I hearing? I'm hearing that actually the majority of people who have not been vaccinated to date aren't what people would characterise as anti-vaccination. They have questions, they have concerns, and sometimes it will be based on incorrect information online. It'll be based on something that they've heard, and they are really just seeking an answer to some of that. And once you have a conversation or connect them to someone who can answer those questions, that actually they will make that decision for themselves and their family. That takes a really targeted approach. It takes us actually finding those people, having the conversation, not waiting for them to come to us. So it is much more labour intensive.
You then also have the group, and we saw on News Hub Nation at the weekend, the Taranaki midwives, and I think there's about 10 or 15 of them who are not going to get vaccinated out of about 63. It's like 15% of them or something. So when you have got people in a community who are working in health, who are educated, highly skilled, middle high income people, what do you do about that? Because they're going to be the difficult group, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think you do exactly what we've done. Say, actually, for those really high risk areas where we need to protect, a mother giving birth needs
deserves to know that they're doing that in a safe environment. And so we can do what we can to protect people in those vulnerable environments, and we're doing that with the vaccine mandates that we've been rolling out. And secondly, we have to create a space where people can ask questions. And I know people are getting to a point where they just want people vaccinated. Please still be willing to have a conversation with people, because that's how you move them. Putting up a wall and being unwilling to have that discussion makes it really hard.
It's really easy to record how many teachers and health workers aren't vaccinated and where they are, and are you going to do specific targeting to reach those people?
Yeah, well, obviously, so we health providers do know who are unvaccinated, and of course we're careful with that information and who has access to it, but they do, and they can do targeted work with those different groups. We will, there will be an ability to know with education, because of course we've got a vaccine mandate there. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to kind of run down to the last sets of questions. So I'm going to try and come to those who haven't really had that many, if I can. Sorry.
Yes. Just on a totally different tack, how concerned are you about the 4.9% inflation rate, and is the government going to do anything to try and control it?
Yeah, so look, I would, as I've already said, what we're seeing here in New Zealand, very similar to what other countries are experiencing. It is not considered necessarily to be a long-term position for New Zealand, a lot being driven here by, for instance, some of our supply chain issues that are actually being experienced globally because of COVID-19. So it is something that you can expect over time to resolve itself.
Nothing that you can do as the government to kind of control that?
Well, again, for things like what's happening with, shipping costs and constraints there, or global oil prices, there are limits to what we can do there.
On inflation.
Come to Janae.
On that issue, the low-income households are disproportionately affected by higher inflation.
Yeah.
And getting to this point where we have higher inflation, low-income households were again affected because they didn't benefit from the asset price inflation that we saw when tax rates were cut. So people who didn't own property were hit last year. Now they hit this year as inflation goes up. So how are you factoring in that situation into your policy making, just sort of more broadly?
Yeah. And look, that implies that somehow a focus on low-income households would be a shift or just simply a response to inflation, whereas actually we've long held a policy approach that has been about trying to lift specifically the incomes of those who currently have the lowest wages in the country. And we've been trying to leverage that up, be it through, the levers that we have, minimum wage, through as an employer ourselves, through some of the targeted tax credit regimes that we have. And we will continue to do that because we are very focused on the cost of living for our low-income households. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to turn it. Look, I'll come to. You haven't had a question.
Dr. Bloomfield, are there any pregnant women in hospital at the moment with COVID-19? And if so, are they unvaccinated?
Not that I'm aware of, but I will go away and check that for you, just to be certain about that. What I would say is that, not speaking necessarily for pregnant women, that very few of our hospitalised cases during this outbreak have been fully vaccinated. The vast majority have been unvaccinated, but we will find out the answer to that specifically.
And Dr. Bloomfield, I don't know whether as a opportunity for a public service announcement, some of the stats out of the United States around, or even Australia around hospitalised pregnant women has been, pretty devastating.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the vaccine is very safe in pregnancy at any point in time, and not only affords protection to the pregnant person, but also some protection through the placenta to the infant as well, or in utero, and then obviously they carry that through post-birth. So my strong encouragement here in New Zealand is for pregnant women to talk to their health professional and to strongly consider getting vaccinated.
I say that because, Joe, as you asked, one of the things I picked up whilst being out on the road is that people have been waiting to have their babies before being vaccinated. And look, whilst I'm really pleased that those individuals have been safe in that intervening period of time, actually it would have been devastating if they had COVID before they were vaccinated, because the outcomes we're seeing in the hospitalisations and the severe illness in pregnant women is awful.
Minister.
Gina, Ben, and then I'm going to finish on Bernard.
Just a clarification, that alert...
I was going to give you a question.
You should.
I'll give you a question.
The alert level review that's happening in 2 weeks for Auckland, will that include the boundary around Auckland, or is the boundary intact until Auckland gets down to level 2 or until there's a
We
one
haven't been so
vaccination?
definitive about it as to say it will remain until X point, but what we are doing is work to see how we can safely allow Aucklanders to, continue movement safely. And so that is a piece of work that we're doing, regardless of what happens with the boundary.
On the table in 2 weeks, or is that a longer piece of work?
That's something that we want to do to ensure that, if, for instance, there is reason to continue with the boundary, we can have, greater movement. I do highlight safe because I know there's a lot of anxiety in parts of the country where there might be low vaccination rates. And I just want to be really clear that we are working very hard to ensure that whatever we do isn't posing risk to other parts of the country, but also acknowledging there's lots of needs for Aucklanders to move around. At the moment, the reasons they can are very limited.
It'll be dropped in 2 weeks.
Look, that's not something that we've considered, but we're doing work to just, regardless of what happens, that we're ready with options. Ben?
You've resisted setting a vaccine target until now, and your government has ridiculed opponents who have set vaccine targets, saying that there shouldn't be vaccine targets.
I don't think I ridicule anyone.
Okay. This government's ministers, several of them, have derided opponents for doing so. Why is now, or Friday, the right time to set a vaccine target?
Well, as you'll have heard Dr. Bloomfield say, whilst, everyone will call it that, I would be loath to ever see that we have a point where we keep vaccinating and then people think job done. Job's not done until every person has, in my mind, until we have tried to reach every single person and we have them vaccinated, because it's a way we can keep them safe. So what we're trying to do, though, is give greater certainty to Auckland and New Zealand about what the future looks like in a highly vaccinated environment. And so that naturally lends itself to saying, here's when we believe we can start making some changes to our system. It's not the idea that suddenly you cut loose and we don't have anything in place, not at all. We still need to be careful, but it's just about talking about milestones for when we can make next moves. Bernard?
On planning for the summer, what advice would you give to people who are getting close to drop-dead dates for booking travel and family holidays and all those festival organisers? They must be right on the edge of saying that's it.
Yeah, well, actually, I talked to some of those and have a bit of a sense of the points in which they have to make decisions, and we're very mindful of those. And as I say, one of the reasons we're on Friday looking to set out this framework and a sense of, when we believe we'll be able to make transitions is to try and help with some of that planning as much as we can. Did I say Mark? I think, Mark, you were next. Were you?
Has Pfizer applied to MedSafe for the ability to use a booster shot in New Zealand?
Not yet. But we are expecting that, and of course we're planning a pace to ensure that once that application comes through and goes through the approval process and Cabinet agrees, then we're in a position both with the vaccine and the program to start delivering a booster shot.
Will work in terms of, is it more like the original Pfizer approval process and the time that took, or is it more like expanding to a new age group in terms of that one seems to go through quite a lot quicker?
It's more like the latter. So in a sense, they're asking for a sort of a revision of the original approval process to add in that third booster, third dose as a booster.
The reason that age range decision took a little longer, though, obviously Pfizer went through MedSafe. MedSafe turned it around quite quickly, and then it went through our technical advisory group, and the technical advisory group spent quite some time considering it. So that was the difference in that process there. Okay, I feel like I believe that I called Mark the last question, so I'm going to...
Vaccine caveats on the reconnecting plan. We have the same vaccine caveats for those 2 groups for Friday's plan.
What do you mean by vaccine caveats, sorry?
To be high vaccine for age groups across the regions and for the vulnerable.
So obviously, this is just another attempt to extract information that we'll be sharing on Friday. So I'm going to stick to that. And a total demerit point as a whole, Gina, you can blame Derek for the fact that I'm now calling time.
For Hamilton Business, will they be included in the business support package on Friday?
You heard me say Minister Robertson will give more details around the work we're doing on Friday.